Bonjour, mes amis, and welcome back to another episode of Illogical History, the series where I teach you all something new about my favorite topic, history. Today's topic is a really long one, so I hope you do enjoy and hopefully learn something new. The topic of this video is something I like to call the World War era. Now, I know you're asking, what is the World War era? The World War era in history, which I define as a period in modern history between 1912 to 1946, was a time where tensions around the world ran high and led to an all-out war multiple times. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The World War era officially starts in 1912 with the First Balkan War between the Balkan League, which was made up of Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, along with support from Italy and Russia, fighting against the Ottoman Empire, with support from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The main cause of this war was the Bosnian Crisis, among other things, such as the strained tensions between the Balkan countries and the Ottoman Empire. The war began on October 8, 1912, and ended in a Balkan League victory on May 30th, 1913, with the Treaty of London, which saw the Ottomans lose a good amount of territory. At the beginning of the war, Bulgaria was promised some land by Serbia, and when the war ended, the Serbians went back on their promise, which angered the Bulgarians, who thought they had been lied to by the Serbians. On June 29, 1913, Bulgaria went to war against a coalition made up of Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, Romania, and the Ottoman Empire, which became the Second Balkan War. The war ended a month later, on August 10, 1913, which saw Bulgaria lose land of their own. Though these two wars didn't exceed a year, these small but yet major European conflicts helped plant the seeds for the First World War, mainly because of the high tensions and military alliances within the continent. On June 28, 1914, while in the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo, Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip. Austria-Hungary was understandably pissed off about the assassination of their future heir to the empire's throne. In the time known as the July Crisis, Austria-Hungary sent an ultimatum to Serbia with the following demands. Suppress all publications which incite hatred and contempt of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy and are directed against its territorial integrity. Dissolve the Serbian nationalist organization Narodna Obrana, or the People's Defense, and all other such societies in Serbia. Eliminate without delay from schoolbooks and public documents all propaganda against Austria-Hungary. Remove from the Serbian military and civil administration all officers and functionaries whose names the Austro-Hungarian government will provide. Accept in Serbia representatives of the Austro-Hungarian government for the suppression of subversive moments. Bring to trial all accessories to the Archduke's assassination and allow Austro-Hungarian delegates or law enforcement officers to take part in the investigations. Arrest Major Vojislav Tenkosic and civil servant Milan Siganovic, who were named as participants in the assassination plot. Cease the cooperation of the Serbian authorities in the traffic in arms and explosives across the frontier. Dismiss and punish the officials of Sabak and Loznica frontier service, guilty of having assisted the perpetrators of the Sarajevo crime. Provide explanations to the Austro-Hungarian government regarding Serbian officials who have expressed themselves in interviews in terms of hostility to the Austro-Hungarian government. And finally, notify the Austro-Hungarian government without delay of the execution of the measures contained in the ultimatum. The ultimatum was seen as not surprising by the Serbian Prime Minister Nikola P. Basic, who at the time was in southern Serbia campaigning for the upcoming elections. When he returned to Belgrade, the Serbian capital, he learned that the Russians would do anything and everything to protect Serbia from any and every outside aggressor. Basic, while welcoming war with Austria-Hungary, did not want the blame for starting it. Instead, The way Bosniak worded the official response, he called out Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany for sending a blank check to Austria-Hungary, encouraging them to send the ultimatum. This response was seen as a highly fumed rejection of the Austro-Hungarian ultimatum. On July 28th, 1 month after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, officially beginning World War I. Russia and Germany joined the war on opposing sides on August 1st, followed by France on August 3rd, and the United Kingdom, South Africa, New Zealand, Ireland, India, Canada, and Belgium, and Australia joined the war on August 4th. Other countries would join in, such as Japan on August 23rd, and the Ottoman Empire on October 31st. At this point, there were two military alliances fighting each other: the Triple Entente, which consisted of Russia, Britain, and France and their allies, and the Central Powers, which consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Britain joined the war because Germany crossed into Belgian territory, in which Belgium was neutral, so they could get to France, bypassing the fortified border. This also brought Belgium into the war. The Germans drew up a plan to win the war, which they called the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan was supposed to see Germany quickly take out France, then turn their attention to Russia. Basically, they were trying to avoid a war on two fronts. The reason they drew this plan up was because the Germans realized that because of Russia's immense size, it would take them longer to mobilize and prepare for war. On paper, this was a great idea by Germany, but when it came time to enact it, all hell broke loose. The German advances were halted just short of Paris, and both sides dug trenches, beginning trench warfare, which stalled the Western Front. On the Eastern Front, Serbia managed to hold off the Austro-Hungarian forces' advances. It is also important to note that around this time, that Serbia's ally in both Balkan wars, Montenegro, joined the war on the side of the Triple Entente. Germany had to send troops to help the Austro-Hungarians. When Russia was ready for war, much earlier than expected may I add, Germany had to move a good percentage of their troops to the Eastern Front to fight the Russians. The Germans defeated the Russians in the Battle of Tannenberg in August of 1914, which was a turning force on the Eastern Front. At Christmas time in 1914, both sides came out of their trenches and had peaceful encounters. This was known as the Christmas Truce of 1914, where both sides would drink together, share stories, and play football, or soccer, however you want to call it. Once the holidays ended, both sides went back into their trenches and became enemies once again. In 1915, warfare picked up with the first and only naval battle of World War I, which was the Battle of Jutland, which ended in a draw. Also in 1915, German submarines sunk the passenger ship the Lusitania, killing 1,162 people on board, including 120 American passengers. This turned international views on Germany from positive to negative. The Germans tried to justify the sinking of the ship by carrying war equipment, which would be discovered in the late 1940s. In May of 1915, Italy joined the war on the side of the Triple Entente. Italy was originally part of the Central Powers, but after a dispute with Austria-Hungary, Italy changed sides. Keep that in mind for later, it'll be important, I promise you. In October of 1915, Bulgaria joined the Central Powers, and together, the combined forces of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Bulgaria took out Serbia and Montenegro, even as they retreated into neutral Albania. Also in 1915, the Ottoman Empire tried to invade Russia through the Caucasus Mountains, but that invasion failed. A couple of losses later, along with a successful holdout of Gallipoli, the Ottomans blamed the losses on the Armenian population in the eastern part of the country, which led to the Armenian Genocide, which would end in 1919, after 1.5 million Armenians would lose their lives and or their homes. That will be a future topic, I promise you. In 1916, things ramped up on both European fronts, but before I go on, let me mention the other advances across the world. In Africa, the Triple Entente quickly jumped over all the German colonies. In the Pacific, Japan took over the Austro-Hungarian city of Tianjin, which was in China, as well as all German colonies in the Pacific. Back in Europe in 1916, the first use of tanks by the British came in the very bloody Battle of the Somme, where the British saw 80,000 casualties on the first day alone. To the south of that, the French were fighting a bloody battle of their own in the Battle of the Marne. Often left out in history of World War I, Irish Republicans staged an uprising in Dublin in order to seek independence from the British. The Irish surrendered after a few days of fighting, and most of the rebel leaders were executed. In August of 1916, Romania decided it would be a good idea to join the war alongside the Triple Entente, but they got absolutely wrecked. After 1916, the morales of the countries involved were very low, so weren't their supplies. The big question hanging into 1917 was, who would break first? And the answer was, eventually, Russia. In 1917, Russia underwent a series of revolutions. In the February Revolution, Tsar Alexander II was overthrown and Russia became a republic. In the October Revolution, Vladimir Lenin overtook Petrograd, which is St. Petersburg today, and planted the seeds for communism in Russia. Russia then signed the Treaty of Versailles with Germany and pulled out of the war. The treaty allowed Germany to occupy the Baltic states, Belarus, and Ukraine for the time being. Also in 1917, Germany had sent a telegram to Mexico, trying to get them to invade the United States. But however, the telegram was intercepted by the British and forwarded their discovery to American President Woodrow Wilson, who promptly declared war on Germany, joining the war. This move proved to be Germany's downfall. Also joining the war in 1917 was Greece. Greece had a bit of a national schism because the king led the Central Powers and the prime minister led the Triple Entente. The king then abdicated, the country united, and Greece joined the Triple Entente. Back in 1916, the British made an invasion through Mesopotamia, which went horribly. And then with the help of British officer T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, the Arab Hejaz were able to successfully revolt against the Ottoman Empire. In 1918, the final assault was on for the Allies. They pushed it from Italy, the Balkans, and the Middle East. Bulgaria was the first to capitulate in September. The Ottomans followed suit in October. The Austro-Hungarian Empire capitulated on November 3rd and proceeded to fall apart. And then finally, at 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918, Germany signed an armistice, ending World War I. In the coming weeks, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, so did the Ottoman Empire, and new countries such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, and Yugoslavia, then known as the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes until 1929, were born. Also in 1918, a new flu was spreading, which began in Spain. This would become known as the Spanish Influenza. The Spanish Influenza became a worldwide pandemic, which was ultimately eradicated in 1920, but not before 50 million lost their lives. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, which saw Germany give up land to France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and some of the newly independent Baltic states, mainly Lithuania. Germany also had to demilitarize the Rhineland. Saarland was proclaimed a special administrative city by the League of Nations, and the Free City of Danzig was also proclaimed. Germany had to pay $85 million USD in war reparations to the Triple Entente. In the years after World War I, many treaties were signed and finalized with the other members of the Central Powers, one of which, the Treaty of Sevres with the Ottomans, was never ratified because another war broke out, turning the Ottoman Empire into the Republic of Turkey in 1923. After the war in Britain, the Irish War of Independence started with the goal of an independent Ireland. The war ended in 1921 and saw the proclamation of the Irish Free State in Northern Ireland, which would become the Republic of Ireland in 1937. Northern Ireland would go on to become a part of the United Kingdom. In Russia, things got really ugly. The October Revolution that had pulled Russia out of World War I turned into a 6-year-long Russian Civil War, which saw 5 to 9 million people killed, and the Bolsheviks came out victorious and proclaimed the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the Soviet Union for short. The Weimar Republic was formed shortly after Germany signed the Armistice, when Kaiser Wilhelm II was overthrown and the Weimar Republic was weak in all aspects, especially economically. Things in Europe settled down for a little while. In 1929, that all changed. The Great Depression had a massive economic effect on the world, especially Germany. In October of 1929, the stock market based in New York City crashed, and it crashed hard. This sent the world into, well, the Great Depression. For 4 years, except for the United States, which saw the Depression end in 1939, the world economy was severely crippled. Prior to the Depression, the United States had granted a loan to Germany so that they could pay their war reparations. When the Depression began, the United States wanted its money back, which made Germany's situation go from really bad to even worse. Eventually, in 1933, the global economy recovered and pretty much back to normal. It's also important to mention that in Italy, a new fascist dictator by the name of Benito Mussolini took control and turned the country around. So when the Great Depression came, Italy wasn't affected as much by it as everyone else was. To give an idea as to how bad the Depression was in Germany, people were carrying literal wheelbarrows to buy bread. Literally wheelbarrows of money to buy bread. That is sad. Anyway, it got that bad. In 1931, Japan invaded China, who was in the middle of a civil war between the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek and the communists under Mao Zedong in occupied Manchuria, which sparked another invasion 6 years later, but more on that in a bit. In 1929, an Austrian man by the name of Adolf Hitler came to rise in Germany's political system. One night in 1929, he led a riot with his personal SA troops, and he got arrested. Good job. He was originally sentenced to 5 years, but only served 9 months. While in jail, Hitler wrote a book titled Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggles, in which he blamed the Jews for Germany's loss in the First World War. In 1932, Hitler ran for president of Germany, but lost to World War I General Paul von Hindenburg. In January 1933, President Hindenburg named Hitler Chancellor of Germany, and when the Reichstag was burnt to the ground, Hitler demanded special and emergency powers to quell any threats, to which this was granted. In 1935, President Hindenburg died, and Hitler proclaimed himself Fuehrer, Dictator of Germany. He set to make Germany great again. Sound familiar, America? Anyways, he made his ambitions and reforms right away by making economic reforms, building the Autobahn and militarizing the Rhineland. Whoops. Hitler began to ramp up his army to show off Germany's strength, in complete violation of the Treaty of Versailles. In Italy, Mussolini ordered his forces in Italian Somaliland and Italian Eritrea to invade Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia today. The invasion began in October of 1935, and the war ended with Abyssinia being taken over in May of 1936. Berlin hosted the Olympic Games in 1936, which had a sense of very strong Germanic nationalism, as you would. Also in 1936, the Spanish Civil War began between the nationalists who were controlled and led by Francisco Franco and their far left-leaning Republicans. The Germans and Italians supported Franco's nationalists, while the Soviets supported the Republicans. Ultimately, the Spanish Civil War ended in 1939 in nationalist victory. In 1937, Hitler began his numerous land conquests by annexing Austria, who wanted to join Germany anyways, so it's a win. Anyways, he then turned to Czechoslovakia, specifically an area of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, which is full of ethnic Germans. In the Munich Agreement of 1938, Germany was granted the Sudetenland in exchange for ending his territorial ambitions. Did that really happen? Well... Also in 1938, the first acts of Jews occurred. Kristallnacht, which translates to the Night of Broken Glass, saw the deaths of 91 Jews, the torching of Jewish synagogues, and the vandalizing of Jews' homes and businesses occurred. 30,000 Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. This was the start of Hitler's final solution, which would see the demise of 6 million Jews over the span of the next few years. In 1937, Japan invaded war-torn China again, this time going as far as capturing the Chinese capital of Nanjing. It was in Nanjing where the infamous Rape of Nanjing happened, and part of why the Chinese halted their civil war so they could fend off the Japanese invasion. In 1939, Hitler broke the agreement he had with the British the year prior and invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia, after Slovakia cried to be free from the joint state. The Czech part was annexed, and Slovakia became a German puppet state. Also in 1939, Italy had invaded and occupied Albania so they could control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea. This is in part of Mussolini's plan to reform the Roman Empire. In July of 1939, Hitler demanded Poland return Danzig and to give them land along the Polish corridor. Poland rejected the demands, obviously. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain warned Hitler that if he invaded Poland, they would declare war. During this time, Hitler signed a secretive non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, even promising him the eastern half of Poland. On September 1st, 1939, at 4:30 a.m., Hitler's troops marched into Poland, beginning World War II. 2 days later, on September 3rd, Britain and France both declared war on Germany. The German army used a new quick attack format called Blitzkrieg, which made militaristic advances a lot swifter than before. The Germans were able to invade Poland from three sides. First, there were troops invading from eastern Prussia, then from East Central Germany, and then from the Czechoslovakia occupied territory. On September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union joined the war and invaded Poland from the east. By mid-October, Poland had fallen and was split up between Germany and the Soviets. Although Poland had fallen, the Polish army never stopped fighting, as some troops and citizens escaped underground, hiding and planning for a way to fight back against their German aggressors. After Poland fell for a while, no new invasions or battles occurred. This period of World War II is considered to be known as the Phony War. The Soviets sent some demands to Finland, which included the transfer of some land near Leningrad. When the Finns refused, the Soviets went to war with Finland in late 1939. What's special about the Winter War is the Finnish, despite being severely outnumbered, were able to hold back the Soviet advances. This was due to Finland being more prepared because of a very talented sniper that kept taking out the Soviet troops. Simo Haya, also known as the White Death, has been known to have over 500 confirmed kills on Soviet soldiers. Eventually, in early 1940, the Soviets defeated the Finns, taking some land in northern Finland, giving the Soviets a border with Norway, and some land in southern Finland. Also in 1940, the Soviets made some demands to Romania in regards to a region known as Bessarabia. The Romanians just quickly accepted that. In April of 1940, Germany was on the move again. The Allies were trying to stop Sweden from sending natural iron through Norway, which both countries said no. The Germans, seeing their imports of iron being under threat, needed to get to Norway. But in order to get there, they needed to get through Denmark. So Germany invaded Denmark, who promptly surrendered in 6 hours. Weak. Anyway, after taking over Denmark, Germany invaded Norway, in which the Allies were overrun. The Allies retreated from Norway, and Germany was able to occupy the entire country. Then a month later, Germany turned west. They invaded Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, conquering them in the process. Then it was on to France, in which they battled the French and British and surrounded them in Dunkirk, in which the Allied troops made a desperate retreat as Germany grew closer. With the French army decimated, the Germans quickly marched into Paris and occupied them. France had fallen. Just as the French were falling, Italy finally joined the war on Germany's side. Germany thought that now that France was out of the war, Britain would surrender. Germany occupied all northern France plus the entire Atlantic coast while they set up a puppet state known as Vichy France. When Chamberlain resigned in 1940, a new prime minister would call the shots, and his name was Winston Churchill. Shit just got interesting. In September of 1940, Operation Sea Lion began, with the goal of invading and conquering Britain. It was also around this time Winston Churchill gave his infamous speech, which read, "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Regular air raids over British cities such as London began. Parents would send their children to live in the countryside away from all the chaos, while everyone else would make the daily visit to the air raid shelters, but morale was really high. Ultimately, Hitler suspended the operation, but however, there was some success to this. What many may not know is the Germans did invade Britain, not the actual island, but rather a chain of islands called the Home Islands in the English Channel. That would be the only land conquest of Britain that Germany would obtain during the entire war. In 1941, the Axis powers added some more allies in Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria. Yugoslavia originally joined the Axis, but a pro-British revolt forced Yugoslavia to switch sides, in which the Axis powers invaded and conquered Yugoslavia, setting up numerous states, the most prominent of which being the independent state of Croatia. The Axis powers then invaded Greece after they were pushed back hard. They ultimately conquered Greece by defeating them on the Iron Crete. The Axis powers began planning a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. They spent a lot of time planning it and drawing up different routes. And finally, on June 22, 1941, in the early hours of the morning, the Axis powers invaded the Soviet Union. With a front nearly 350 miles long, it is considered the largest invasion in history. The Germans and Finns, who had joined the fight against the Soviets, met up and began a 4-year siege of Leningrad, in which tens of thousands of civilians were starved to death over the 4-year period. It was said that Stalin was greatly distraught at the news of Germany's betrayal and didn't respond to the news until a week later. Germany used an encirclement tactic, which was actually pretty successful. At times, anywhere between 650,000 and 800,000 soldiers would be captured each time there was an encirclement of Soviet troops. The Germans almost made it to Moscow, but then came the Russian winter. Germany's advances were halted and were even pushed back, so they had to dig in for the winter. In the Pacific theater, Japan had its supply of oil cut off by the United States. In response, Japan spent months trying to find a way to expand to the Pacific, because, they wanted to do that. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese Air Force bombed Pearl Harbor, sinking and damaging some ships. The next day, the United States entered World War II by declaring war against Japan. The Japanese, however, did not bombard their naval repair yards or their oil facilities, so the U.S. Navy would be back up and running again in no time. Also on December 7th, Japan invaded Indochina, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, today's Indonesia, and began an assault on British Myanmar. In 1942, the war saw the tides turn on the Axis powers. Let's start in Asia, where the Japanese were planning on invading and capturing Midway Island to use as a naval base. However, the United States encrypted the Japanese codes and knew their plans, so they met and defeated the Japanese at Midway. The loss of Midway turned the tide of the war against the Japanese and would start their downtrend. At the start of the war, the Allied powers invaded Axis powers colonies, and by 1941, with the exception of French Africa, the Axis powers colonies were conquered. The United States rolled into Africa and liberated French Africa, and that was in 1942. In Europe, the Germans were starting to be pushed back. They countered by pushing south into the Caucasus regions of Russia. There, they met the Soviets in a battle that would decide the fate of the Soviet Union's oil fields and ultimately the war. And that was the Battle of Stalingrad. For 8 months, both sides fought hard and ruthlessly for the right to take the city. But however, with the constant Soviet reinforcements, in 1943, German soldiers in Stalingrad surrendered. This is the moment that turned the tide for Germany. In 1943, the Allies made another push, this time through Italy. They invaded through Sicily and pushed up the Italian peninsula. In September 1943, Italy ousted and assassinated Mussolini, surrendered to the Allies, but was quickly occupied by Germany before they were reaching Rome. So they switched sides yet again. Remember from earlier? They were occupied by Germany as they were reaching Rome. Germany was being pushed back still, but even more than before, especially since they had just lost at Stalingrad. The Russians were showing no mercy, but the worst was yet to come. In Asia, the British had halted all Japanese advances into British India, and they were sending Japan on the run. Back to 1942 for a moment. In the United States, fear amongst the government was rising because they believed Germany was creating a bomb destructive enough to destroy entire cities. So the United States brought on Albert Einstein, who was a super genius, to help design the bomb before Germany could. With the help of Canada, the Manhattan Project began, and it wouldn't be complete until 1945. In 1944, Polish troops and Polish citizens that had been hiding staged a rebellion against their German occupiers, which backfired horribly against them, and many were either killed or sent to concentration camps. On the Russian front, the siege of Leningrad was finally broken, and the Russians kept on going. When they reached Poland, they began to discover the horrible truth of these concentration camps. The Russians began liberating these camps. On June 6, 1944, the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy. The British invaded Golden Sword, the Canadians at Judo, and the Americans at Utah and Omaha. The Allies were able to successfully capture German-held forts along the beaches, and this was the start of the end of World War II in Europe. The Allies also made a landing in southern France in September of 1944 and began a push. Paris was liberated in August of 1944, and along with that, the restoration of France. This was a huge blow to Germany's morale and Hitler's sanity as a whole. I guess you could say he was furious. Sorry, that was bad. Anyways, in Asia, the Allies advanced into Burma, the Philippines, Indonesia, and several other islands of the Pacific. In 1945, things came crashing down for the Axis powers. First, the Soviets pushed Germany out of their land entirely and made a beeline for the Balkans. Then, before the year began, the Allies liberated Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, and the Allies continued to push up from Italy. Then, another blow to German defenses came when the Allies crossed the mighty Rhine River and into German soil. The Allies and Soviets met up in Bavaria in March after the Soviets finally liberated the Balkans and the Allies fully liberated Italy. While pushing Germany back into their soil, the Soviets continued to liberate concentration camps across Poland, and they even committed some war atrocities of their own, when they raped several Jewish women, which became known as the Rape of Europe. The Allies continued to push Germany back further and further. The battle began in mid-April of 1945, and on the 30th of April, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. A week later, Germany officially surrendered, ending World War II in Europe. But meanwhile in Asia, the war was still being fought. In July of 1945, the United States captured the island of Iwo Jima from Japan. In China, Japan was being pushed back further and further by Chinese forces. After the capture of Iwo Jima, days later, the United States tested the atomic bomb in New Mexico. Now a new question was posed. Did the Americans continue their invasion into the Japanese mainland and drag out the war, or did they use the bomb and hope for Japanese surrender? On August 6, 1945, in the early morning hours, the United States dropped a little boy on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, killing 100,000. New President Harry Truman issued an ultimatum to Japan: surrender or face utter destruction. On August 9th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and immediately invaded Manchuria. And on that same day, the United States dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki. Japan ultimately surrendered on August 15th, ending World War II. The Treaty of Japan was signed on September 2nd, 1945 in Tokyo Harbor. The map across the world changed drastically after World War II. In Europe, Germany lost even more land and was divided into 4 occupation zones, so was the city of Berlin itself. Austria was also separated from Germany and was too divided up, but reunited in 1956. Eastern Europe fell under Soviet influence, which led Churchill to proclaim an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe in 1946. In Asia, Japan had to give up land to China, which had been taken by the Japanese as far back as 1895 and included Taiwan. Also in 1946, the Chinese Civil War resumed, and the Communists overwhelmed the Nationalist forces, and in 1949, the Nationalist forces retreated to the island of Taiwan, and then the Civil War. and the dispute between China and Taiwan is an ongoing dispute to this very day. In 1947, a civil war erupted in Greece, in which the British aided the nationalist forces against the communists, and ultimately it ended in a nationalist victory. In the end, the World War era was a very troubling time for the world and changed the world in so many ways. With the evolution of modern warfare, to the creation of the atomic bomb, to the Cold War, this is by far my personal favorite era in history, and this video was really fun to make. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully learned something new. Anyways, that's it for me, and I'll see you in the next video. Au revoir, mes amis.